What happens when art imitates life? Why would an up-and-coming actor choose the streets over his promising career? This is the tragic story of actor Lloyd Avery II. Welcome back, everyone. I am back after a long-ass hiatus that honestly was beyond my control. I will explain my absence very soon on my main solo podcast, which is DannieBSpeaks, the podcast that will be coming back. However, right now, you are tuned in to DannieBSpeaks Presents, Not Another True Crime Podcast, and I am your host, Tahir Ali. This episode is one that I have been wanting to do for a while now. This is about the short, chaotic, and quite interesting life of actor Lloyd Avery II. Disclaimer, I'm a little rusty. Okay, I'm very rusty. And my voice is still hoarse and in and out, but I'm still a mess. It's still a mess. So we're just going to have to get through it, but I'm doing my best. So just bear with me. So who was Lloyd Avery II? Now, many of us know his face and his work, but he wasn't around long enough to become a household name per se. If you want to see pictures of the late actor, head over to my website, DannieBSpeaks.com, where I have plenty of pictures of him under this podcast. After I explain who he was in the movies that we are familiar with, you will clearly remember who he is. Now, his most popular role was that of Knucklehead number 2 in the 1991 classic Boys in the Hood. He was the guy who leaned out of the window with a sawed-off shotgun, shooting and killing Ricky, who was played by Morris Chestnut. He also had a small role credited as Thug 1 at the beginning of Poetic Justice, where he spots rapper Q-Tip's character Markel at the drive-in, realizing that he and his real-life brother, Shay Avery, had beef with, and of course, shoot and kill him. Are we seeing a pattern with his characters? I mean, more into that later. But he also had roles in Doogie Howser MD, Don't Be a Menace, The Breaks, Lockdown, and Shot. So maybe you may get the visual of who he is now, but if not, head over to the website and you can put a face with the story. He was born Lloyd Fernandez Avery II on June 21st, 1969 in Los Angeles, California, to a Mexican-American mother, Linda, and an African-American father, Lloyd Avery. He grew up in the View Park neighborhood, which is right next to Baldwin Hills, aka the Black Beverly Hills. He had 3 other siblings, including his brother Shay, who I mentioned a little while ago that was in Poetic Justice with him. The Averys were known as a quiet yet well-known middle-class family. His father ran his own business as a plumber, electrician, and carpenter, and he made a very good living, which made it possible for Lloyd's mother to be a stay-at-home mom until the late 80s when she started working in banking. Lloyd had a very comfortable childhood where he had dreams of actually becoming a musician. This dream would come back to bite him in the ass later on. More on that later, of course. His brother Shay is quoted as saying about their childhood, "We were silver spoon kids. We never wanted for nothing. We had a pool in the backyard where a lot of our neighbors didn't. We grew up in a Christian household where our parents instilled many values in us, especially the value of a good education." Lloyd attended Beverly Hills High School, where he excelled in baseball and water polo. Come through water polo. Most importantly, he excelled in the classroom, but was definitely considered a class clown. He was shy, but fun to be around. He didn't date much, but the girls loved him. Some of his closest friends growing up were the children of people like Quincy Jones, Smokey Robinson, and Charles Avant. He didn't drink or do drugs, and on the weekends, he and his friends would attend house parties, mansion parties, while the parents were out of town. However, it was at these parties where his mischievous side will come out, and I'm sure people can look back on it now which at the time it appeared to just be an innocent game, but was truly the foundation from a high that he so desperately needed. At these parties, he would play a game called Party and Porch. I had no clue what this was, and apparently it was a game that rich kids play where they go to parties and just steal shit just to steal it. I mean, for no reason at all. They'll just come to one of their friends' house or some party that they're invited to or whatever and just take something just to say that they could take it. They didn't need anything. It was just because, it was just something fun to do. But still at this time, Lloyd was no budding criminal. He was seen as an attention seeker, though. When he couldn't steal things for the fun of it, his mischievous streak would come out. He never once showed any interest in gang culture until 1991. Keep that in mind. His friends would joke about how he had multiple personalities because one minute he was funny, the next minute he was mischievous, then he would turn into a shit starter, and then be sweet all at different times. Like when he was a teenager, he would make sure that he would give all of his friends Christmas cards, just little stuff like that. It was like a switch would go off and you never knew what Lloyd you would get. However, he was never a danger to anyone. He was just a goofy kid, pretty much. After high school, he attended Los Angeles Trade Technical College, but ended up dropping out not long after. He then started working alongside his father and had a natural talent as a handyman, but that was not what he wanted to do as a career. In 1990, everything started changing for him. Was he starting to unravel, or was this just his personality all along? In 1990, Lloyd had a couple short stays in prison. One was for stealing music equipment from Guitar Center because he wanted to follow his passion to work in the music business. The other time was after attending a frat party at UCLA where he started an altercation with some partygoers by talking mess and cracking on them. Lloyd being Lloyd, he took it too far. Now, during this altercation, a gun was fired into the air. Police were called and arrests were made. Lloyd wasn't the one who fired the gun, but he was arrested for having a fake ID. One of his friends that was arrested with him for also having a fake ID said that he was completely freaked out by the whole thing. But Lloyd thought that being in jail was funny and actually liked it. I'm sure that freaked the friend out as well. I mean, he said he liked it and wanted to go back and all this other stuff. So, yeah. Lloyd had met John Singleton, who was an up-and-coming director, not long before these incidents started happening. He just met him from around the way. It was also around this time that John Singleton started making his first feature film, which of course was Boys in the Hood. Lloyd said years later during his trial that he met John Singleton at the right time in his life. John Singleton put him in a couple of his movies in small but memorable roles, which I explained earlier. And even though Lloyd only appeared in several small scenes in a few movies, he became known as a quote-unquote hood celebrity. Like really, that's what he was called. And it was mainly because of his notorious role in films as a member of the Crenshaw Mafia. The once shy Lloyd Avery II was thoroughly enjoying his newfound fame. He hired an agent and even began his music career where he produced Tisha Campbell's lead single Push off of her debut album Tisha. However, with this newfound fame and success, he started acting out. Even at the LA Poetic Justice premiere, where during the closing credits, he stood up and yelled, "That shit was whack, John." I mean, in front of everybody. And this was at the premiere, the Los Angeles premiere, where everybody was there. And he gave not one single solitary shit about it. I'm here for it. But I cackled when I first read that. I just got visuals and it was everything. But anyway, this behavior only proved that this was the beginning of the end for Lloyd Avery II. So where did it all go wrong? Soon after the film's 1991 release, Avery moved from his middle-class neighborhood into the jungle, which is a Bloods-affiliated neighborhood in South Central Los Angeles. So he pretty much moved from the Black Beverly Hills into Blood country. And he often wore red with Chuck Taylors and khakis and grew so fixated on the streets that he had jungles with a Z tattooed above his left eyebrow. In other words, the actor who played a Blood who shot Ricky in a movie had turned into a real-life Blood. During this time, he was still pursuing his acting career, but he started missing auditions. And when he did show up, he was rarely prepared for them, even if he bothered showing up at all. One director said that she auditioned him once, and if this was how he was auditioning, he wasn't going to get anything. He wasn't memorizing lines, nothing. It was bad. Avery's music career had also stalled despite his numerous and influential industry connections. Despite appearing in a blockbuster like Boys in the Hood, he wouldn't appear in another film until 3 years later. Surprisingly, Lloyd had the respect and OG earns due to a murder he committed on film, but he was determined to earn his stripes the old-fashioned way. He put in work, and the Bloods gangsters showered him with the attention that he craved. His anger and frustration that he had festered into criminal activity stemmed from the fact that he desperately wanted to be a star. But he was come to terms with the realization that it wasn't going the way that he wanted it to go. Casting opportunities like Boys in the Hood and Poetic Justice had come so easily that Avery believed every role would come so easily to him. Another reason why Lloyd's career was failing is that he continued to ruin so many of his friendships. John Singleton, who put him in 2 of his films and wanted to give him more work, he retained a quite fondness for Lloyd. You know, he found his practical jokes funny, and he really just liked him as a person. That was until he started antagonizing John. Even after he pulled the stunt at the Poetic Justice premiere, John still had a likeness for him. But in one conversation with John, he called him a punk-ass nigga, and it got to the point where John stopped taking his phone calls. As his friends grew up and moved on, Lloyd became increasingly isolated. An old roommate of his had to distance himself from Lloyd as well. Lloyd would call his former roommate and just say random shit like, "I'm the king of the streets, I'm the hardest," just stuff like that. And it was just beginning to be too much. So by the beginning of 1999, as Avery was turning 30 years old, he moved into an office building in Santa Barbara Plaza with a shared bathroom down the hall. So as you can see, by this time he had completely fallen off. With his acting career all but dried up, he cashed small residual checks and washed cars for $5. The LA police also suspected that he was selling crack. A little luck did find him in February of 1999, where he had an uncredited role as man in jail in the comedy film The Breaks. By March 1999, his brother Shay was the father of a 2-year-old son and had returned to school. He won a trade tech scholarship and was gifted $2,500 in tools. His other siblings, a brother Sanjay and little sister Tico, had also graduated from college. But Lloyd, he stayed immersed in the culture of the streets and the gangster lifestyle. Lloyd fled the jungle in April 1999 after what was described as an altercation with members of the Nation of Islam. He cleaned out his apartment in the middle of the night and stayed at his grandmother's house. Not long after leaving his longtime apartment, he decided to share a Hollywood crash pad with 4 random surfers that he had just met. I mean, he was all over the place by this time. That arrangement came to an end when he maced his roommate's mother. But wait, there's more. One time at a nightclub, he also maced former MTV VJ Downtown Julie Brown. Dude was way out of control. His life was in a free fall for sure. He would steal a bike or a car to get to work and was said to have packed a gun to a casting call. A witness actually saw him wielding a gun during an argument on the Venice Beach boardwalk. He seemed violent one minute, then weepy and apologetic the next. He also started going to church, but would rarely make it inside. He would get dressed, go, be there, but would leave prior to the lesson and just walk around the grounds. His Aunt Carol Avery said she always figured he was struggling and Satan was pulling at him to keep him from hearing the lesson. Now, believe it or not, it gets much more worse from here on out. By this time, he was becoming even more embroiled in the LA gang scene and more violent. In mid-1999, he became involved in a real-life gang-related incident when he participated in the murders of 2 drug dealers. Although he no longer lived in the jungle, he still hung out with residents there. And on July 1st, 1999, at around 4 p.m., Lloyd approached Annette Lewis and Percy Branch, who were sitting under a tree near Santa Barbara Plaza. According to police reports, after a short argument allegedly over a drug debt, Avery pulled out a .45. He fired his weapon at Lewis before turning it on Branch, who was shot in the stomach. Lewis died later that day, while Branch passed away 3 weeks later due to complications from his gunshot wounds. Surprisingly, Lloyd didn't go into hiding after the murders. Instead, he went on to film 2 movies while on the run. While staying at his grandmother's house, he received some unexpected good news from his agent at Privileged Talent and Models that he had booked a movie role in New Mexico. This was only 13 days after the murders of Lewis and Branch, and Avery was on set for the filming of Lockdown, which started on July 14th, 1999, in New Mexico. The filming location was a scene of one of the deadliest prison riots in United States history. It was known as the Old Main, and this section of the prison was closed down in 1998. There were still relics of violence around, such as axe marks from where snitches were decapitated. A lot of people thought that it was just bad karma around, whatever, I don't know what you want to call it, but it wasn't good. It wasn't a good atmosphere to be in, and it was very tense. So when filming wrapped for the day, the crew would often unwind at a local bar. Usually, Avery refused to mix with the crew, preferring to remain in his hotel room. That was just his thing. He was just a person who liked to be to himself quite a bit, he was basically like that his entire life. But on one rare occasion, he decided to hang out after filming. And of course, he ended up fighting with one of the lead actors, DeAndre Bonds, who has his own little story that I would like to tell. But the scuffle was broken up by the tattoo artist on set. He also started feuding with the hair and makeup department. He threatened the makeup department lead that he was going to find her and her family when they got back to LA and murder them. Out of control. He already made himself a pariah on set. He got into a real fight with one of his fellow actors after a fight scene that they had. He also threw a huge tantrum after filming a scene in which his character Nate was thrown into a freezer. But this. Possibly his biggest mistake was continuously antagonizing Master P, who was one of the stars and producers of the film. P's guys would come up to the director and say, "Do you want us to fuck him up?" And director John Lucenhop would tell them, "No, please just leave him alone." As a result of his crazy, erratic, and dangerous behavior, the producers had to cut some of his scenes. And not long after that, he was thrown off the movie set altogether. On the day Lloyd was fired from the set of Lockdown, he was spotted by crew smoking weed on the back of a grip truck during his lunch break while blasting music from a stolen boombox. When he was asked to return the radio, Lloyd stormed into the makeup room and lunged towards the makeup department lead, Melanie Mills, who he had already threatened. But before he could reach her, he was intercepted by the tattoo artist again, who punched him in the face and splattered blood everywhere. Lloyd was then chased off the set by Master P's entourage. He ended up running towards a new prison facility that was down the road. Now, mind you, he was still dressed in his full wardrobe as a prisoner from the movie set. Once he reached the prison yard, he scaled a tall barbed wire fence. This is like a real life movie. He was truly living out his characters in real life. That is weird, but let's move on. So at this moment, sirens began blaring and guns were drawn. Lloyd had unwittingly infiltrated a working prison. He had no idea. The film's line producer had to plead with the guards and expert snipers to stand down. Once subdued, Lloyd was ordered to leave the state of New Mexico. His ass got kicked out of the whole state. And New Mexico at that. So we'll just go on. Despite the humiliation of getting fired from Lockdown and practically being escorted out of a state, Lloyd actually felt optimistic about his acting career when he returned to LA. He started attending auditions and even wrote a movie script titled G in a Bottle. Christine Chapman, who was his agent at Privileged Talent and Models, said the movie was like Kazam. Remember that corny ass movie where Shaq was a genie? That's what it was giving. So a quick synopsis that she gave was that a kid finds a bottle and out comes this ex-gang member who changed his ways. She said it was actually kind of good. You could tell that he was definitely struggling internally and he wanted to get out of this lifestyle, but he couldn't. I mean, he seriously couldn't. Around this time, Lloyd befriended and eventually moved in with his agent's son, who was an aspiring model named Sean Spraker. After a night of partying, Lloyd crashed at the studio apartment of Spraker's childhood friend, Jeremy McLaughlin, another client at their agency. For the next 3 months or so, he just didn't leave. Spraker said that there was really nothing that they could do about it, and no one wanted to confront him. The struggling actor and music producer definitely seemed personally and professionally lost. And then, things appeared to brighten up for him. Well, at least for the moment. Lloyd landed what was to be his most influential role to date, and almost life-changing in a sense. He appeared as the gangster GRide in the 2001 independent low-budget indie film Shot, which documented life on the dangerous streets of South Central Los Angeles. Roger Roth, the film's writer and director, says he was impressed by Lloyd's audition. He had brought all of his emotions during the scene that he read and instantly won him over. The role came naturally to Avery and it showed in his performance. Roth said that he's one of the best actors that I've ever worked with. He could nail every line, he could make you believe it, he could make you feel it. Lloyd became completely invested in the project. He demanded the final product be real and authentic and would protest when a line of dialogue or a costume felt anything less than authentic. Lloyd would also serve as a technical advisor on the film by offering up his own experience of gang-related life. Roth would pester Lloyd with questions about the hood and even his own past. He even one day asked him if he had ever been involved in any killings, and Lloyd just gave him a smirk. He wasn't going to tell him nothing. So, of course, in typical Lloyd fashion, he started to bully and intimidate Roth just out the blue. On several occasions, he promised that he would kill him, and he would even remind Roth that he didn't forget that he was going to kill him. I mean, he would go from one extreme to another. When Roth thinks back on Lloyd, he believes that it was one of the greatest missed opportunities. And if he had been able to control himself and not commit a double murder, because let's not forget, he did murder 2 people, allegedly, and was on the run. But he doesn't believe that he would not have been a big success. But Lloyd, he had a lot on his mind, and his past was catching up with who all of this time, remember, he had been harboring his dark secret. Now, back in LA, the double murder was still being investigated by detectives. And when the wanted posters went up in the fall of 1999, Lloyd was couch surfing with friends and family. His brother Shay remembers the last night he spent with his brother as a free man. They were sitting in the garage of their grandmother's house near Beverly Hills, and as they sat, they talked, smoked, and Shay recalled his brother saying, "I've had a good life," and then paused for a while and said, "Do you want to hear something scary?" And his brother knew in the back of his mind that with Los Angeles detectives had been searching for his brother and wanting to speak with him, he knew that he wanted to get something off of his chest, but Shay was worried about what he might say and didn't want to hear it. Nothing more was said that evening, and Lloyd spent the night sleeping on the floor of his grandmother's bedroom. The LAPD were aware of exactly where Lloyd was hiding out, and the next morning they moved in to make an arrest. Shay said he remembered the helicopters that morning. They were louder than usual, and there was lots of traffic outside his grandmother's house. Lloyd was in the kitchen with his bike, and before he left through the back door, he gave his brother one last hug. But nothing more was said about the previous night, not in any more conversations that they ever had. He made his way up Crescent Heights Boulevard, making a U-turn where he pulled alongside the driver's side door of a police cruiser. Then he brazenly leaned forward and asked the officer, "What's up?" Just then, the officer opened his door, and Lloyd stumbled momentarily before recovering quickly, speeding west in an attempt to elude the pursuing police cruiser. He soon collided with another police cruiser and was placed under arrest for the double murders. This was December 8th, 1999. Now, he had been apprehended following a tip from Sean Spraker. The roommates had previously had a falling out after Lloyd maced Spraker's mother, who, remember, was Lloyd's agent, Christine Chapman. and this happened during an argument at the office. Lloyd considered his arrest to be fate. By the time of his arrest, he had definitely lost his way, and he knew that prison offered him a chance to turn his life around. Now, while Lloyd was awaiting trial, he was incarcerated at the North County Correctional Facility, where he found God and salvation in Chaplain Dennis Clark's congregation. After a year in jail, he went to trial in December of 2000. During each morning in court, Lloyd carried his Bible with highlighted passages and scribbles he had made in the margin. From the start of the prosecution's opening statement, it appeared that a different Lloyd Avery was being judged, not the devout Christian that emerged in jail, whom other inmates had nicknamed Baby Jesus. The Lloyd Avery being tried was the blood who shot Ricky. During the prosecution's opening testimony, the district attorney asked, "What is this case about? You've heard the phrase art imitating life. Well, this is a case about life imitating and even exceeding art." Now, despite the fact that the prosecution had evidence from 3 eyewitnesses, there appeared to be credibility issues, including the star witness who had asked for money in exchange for his testimony. While other eyewitnesses claimed that the shooter was 5'7" and dark-skinned, Lloyd was around 6'1" and had a reddish-brown complexion. Branch, the victim who died 3 weeks after the shooting, adamantly told police that Avery wasn't the shooter. The murder weapon was never recovered, and police accidentally destroyed shelled casings from 2 shootings involving Avery from the spring of 1999. It was a shootout at the Islamic Center and a drive-by on Hillcrest Avenue, both of which alleged to have matched to the ballistics from the murders. Judge Robert J. Perry said from the bench that this is definitely an embarrassment. It is shoddy police work, unquestionably. Now, Lloyd did take the stand in his own defense, claiming he was somewhere in Hollywood at the time of the murder, and then clashed with Deputy District Attorney Chun, who claimed that such a weak alibi offered little to prove anything about his whereabouts, I should say. At the conclusion of the proceedings, Lloyd was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Lloyd arrived at Pelican Bay State Prison in March 2001. During his time there, he kept out of trouble and mostly preoccupied with spreading God's words to his fellow inmates, something that would ultimately cause his death. In August 2005, Lloyd was paired up in a double cell with another inmate. The cellmate was Kevin Roby, who was an Air Force Academy dropout and paranoid schizophrenic, serving a life sentence for a horrible rape and murder of his sister in January 1987. During his time in prison, Roby had found a different faith to Avery, and that was Satanism. The devout Lloyd believed that divine providence had offered him an opportunity in his living arrangement. He wrote to Chaplain Clark in a letter dated August 29, 2005, "I know God has him around me for a reason. He knows very well that I am a devout Christian, and I pray for him to the Lord every day that he gives his life to God." What happened next is mostly known from Kevin Roby's own account, where he claims that Lloyd had apparently tried to convert him unsuccessfully and was warned by Roby to stop preaching about God. On the evening of Sunday, September 4th, 2005, these spiritual disputes between Avery and Roby turned violent. Roby would explain that Lloyd was pushing his agenda to convert him to Christianity. The violent altercation ended with Roby choking Lloyd unconscious, causing him to bleed into his lungs. He then placed Lloyd's body in bed under the covers so it wouldn't immediately alert the guards to his death. Over the next day and a half, correctional officers made 11 counts of the inmates, which included a standing count at 4:30 p.m. on that Monday. During each of these counts, Lloyd was tallied. He was counted for. With his cellmate dead, Roby ate double rations and even wrote a flirtatious letter to one of Avery's pen pals. In his letter statement to prison authorities, Roby then tied a string around Avery's arm and tugged his limbs like a marionette in order to fool the correctional officers into believing that he was still alive. Shortly before that Tuesday noon count, Roby removed the body from the bunk and positioned it into a pentagram that he had drawn on the cell block 4. So mind you, he had been dead in the cell for about 2 days at this point. As part of the ceremony that he undertook, Roby painted the cell walls with Avery's blood as part of a satanic ritual intended as a warning to God. Years later, Roby said, "He is next on the agenda once I accomplish what I want to accomplish in this realm." It took approximately 38 hours for correctional officers to find the body of Lloyd Avery II. When officers entered their cell, Roby was handcuffed and Avery's body was transferred to the infirmary and there administered CPR despite the fact that he was already decomposing. And he was pronounced dead at 12:10 p.m. that day. Avery's family, including his brother Shay and mother Linda, doubted the official version of the circumstances surrounding Lloyd's death. The California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation listed the cause of death as aspiration of blood with blunt force trauma as a contributing factor. The Avery family conducted a private autopsy which stated that the cause of death as blunt force trauma complicated by aspiration of blood. It also made mention of the injury to Avery's skull, describing a 1.5-inch abrasion to his temple as suggestive of either a blow due to a flat surface such as a carpenter's hammer or impact on a similar type surface. The mention of a carpenter's hammer led to some, including the Avery family, to believe that it was possible Roby hadn't acted alone. But the blunt force trauma described from such a weapon is similar to the type of wounds caused by Avery's head being banged on the stainless steel sink in their cell. A later CDRC investigation found no evidence that correctional officers played any part in the death of Lloyd Avery II. Hoping that a trial would provide them with answers as to the circumstances of the death of their loved one, the family urged local authorities to file charges against Roby. The district attorney refused, citing the fact that Roby had both confessed to the crimes and he was not eligible for the death penalty. The family appealed to the state attorney general, who were inclined to agree with the local DA's decision. Of course. They considered filing a wrongful death lawsuit, but the civil rights movement, NAACP, as well as the law firm of Johnny Cochran decided against representing the Avery family. Around this time, the CDRC conducted 2 investigations under the supervision of the California Inspector General Office Bureau of Independent Review. One into the circumstances of Avery's death and the other on the conduct of the correctional officers. This report, released in early 2007, found the correctional officers failed to follow basic procedures and guidelines, such as removing Avery's body before photographing the crime scene, and most importantly, for failing to notice that he had been dead in his cell for 38 hours before his discovery. Following an appeal, 5 of the officers involved were found guilty of misconduct and received disciplinary action from a 5% pay cut for 45 days to a 10% pay cut for a 6-month period. When Linda Avery heard about the officers' punishment, and she was not impressed. She was quoted as saying, "So they just got a little tap on the hand. Crazy." When contacted in November 2020, the correctional officer who found Avery's body refused to comment, saying, "I have nothing to say about it, man. I'm retired. It's no longer a part of my life." Another correctional officer who had knowledge of the incident and who asked to remain anonymous said that miscounts are not uncommon. "These prisoners are assholes," he said in 2007. "They aren't nice people. So you're trying to get your count done, and there's one person who refuses to stand. Are you going to count him? We like a quiet day. We cherish a quiet day. I know all these officers involved in the case. They didn't do this on purpose. Was it lazy? Sure. Do they have absolute regret? Yes. To me, if there is any mystery here, it's why was Roby taken from a single cell status to being a double? Who cleared it? Prison officials don't clear it. That's management." That same year, 2007, Pelican Bay administration officials declined to answer questions concerning the matter, citing third-party confidentiality and other individual privacy concerns. Stop it. Kevin Roby received another life sentence and remains at Pelican Bay Prison, where he continues to sign his letters, Satanic Christ. Is that right? Okay. Believing himself, in his own words, to be the prophesied killer of God and the rightful ruler of the universe. Lord have mercy. In letters, he has described how it was necessary to perform 2 rituals over the body of Lloyd Avery in order to fulfill some satanic prophecy. He claims he is not a devil worshiper, but insists he is the Christ of darkness. Okay, girl. Now, there have been many questions surrounding Lloyd Avery's death that have never been answered. Lloyd's family still cannot understand how he landed in prison in the first place. No one could put their finger on it. People that knew Lloyd were like, what the fuck? How did Lloyd turn into a gangster? His brother Shay has kept some of Lloyd's belongings in his garage, such as the BMX bike he was riding the morning of his arrest, as well as the Bible he studied in prison. He says it was his big brother who brought him closer to God, closer to believing in Jesus. He remembers his brother fondly and even named his youngest son Lloyd. Looks just like him too, Shay said. It's a good name. I didn't want it to get lost. Wanted to hand it down. In the 15 years since his murder, Lloyd has become a hood legend, and the story of his life and death have become something akin to movie lore. The question of how Lloyd Avery turned into a gangster has never been adequately answered. His brother Shay likens his brother's descent into gang life of that of Tupac Shakur. I like to call it the Tupac syndrome, he says. Lloyd felt that he had something to prove when he really didn't. Even if you have money and fame, you will sacrifice all of that just to have respect from a bunch of thugs. The aspiring actor turned gangbanger had chosen to live a violent life and ended up dying a particularly violent death. Now let's unpack all of this. So the first time that I heard about this story was probably about maybe 5-6 years ago, I believe, give a year or two. And I think I was watching Boys in the Hood or something like on TV. And I was like, I wonder what happened to that dude, because he had a very memorable role, of course. You know, he's the one that, he's the one that shot and killed Ricky. One of the most memorable scenes in movie history. I mean, let's keep it real. I didn't know his name. I think I did a Google search, maybe something on the order of, where is the actor who killed Ricky in Boys in the Hood? Something like that. I can't remember exactly what I put, but his name came up and said that he had passed away. So I was like, oh, wow, and then when I got into this story, I was just like completely enamored. I was really shocked. I was like, this dude was never a gangbanger. He came from Baldwin Hills pretty much. And after he played a gangbanger on TV or in movies, he became a gangbanger. It was the craziest thing. And then not only to find out how he ended up in prison and everything that happened in between, from Boys in the Hood to when he got arrested, and then to find out how he died. I was just like, wow. I mean, this was the craziest thing ever. I mean, did anybody else know this story? I mean, as I mentioned, I found out about this quite a few years ago, but I really started doing more research on it when I wanted to come back and do this podcast, and I just found out more and more and more. Anyway, do you think that there was some kind of undiagnosed mental illness with him? Remember, when I was talking earlier in the podcast, a lot of his friends were saying that they joked around and said that he had like different personalities, like he would be a different person. This is before he even got into acting. One minute he would be nice, one minute he would be the sweetest guy you'd ever meet, then he'd be doing something sneaky and mischievous, and then the next minute he would just like go off. I mean, I truly believe that there was something going on there that maybe if he would have been able to work through, that this would have never happened. But, I'm not the type of person that really lives in woulda, shoulda, coulda. I guess you can in some senses, but I don't know. It's a crazy story, but I feel bad. I think that he was just lost in a lot of ways. I know he liked attention. Even though he was shy, he still wanted attention. And when he finally got the attention that he had tried for years to get attention, doing little things, like trying to start stuff and trying to be the center of attention and all these other things that he did. But when he finally started getting the attention that he so craved, it came from gangbangers, because he played a murderous gangbanger in movies and he became almost like a hero to them. So that was the story of Lloyd Avery II. I told y'all there was a lot going on in this story. I tried my best to put it together and not overdo it. Hopefully you were able to get the gist of this story that hasn't been told out in the public. I think for so many reasons that it should be. I want to thank you all for tuning in to Danny B Speaks Presents Not Another True Crime Podcast. I do want to say that the information shared in these shows is not meant to offend anyone. I get my research from Al Gore's internet like most people do, or if I actually know parties involved in a story that I'm doing, I will get it from them. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Audible. I'm all over the place. Let's just, And also don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube page, Danny B Speaks, where the podcast is also on there as well. And I will be uploading other material to Danny B Speaks pretty soon. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Danny B Speaks. Don't forget to check out my website, DannieBSpeaks.com. If you would like to be a sponsor of the podcast, or if you would like for me to sponsor you, please hit me up at DannieBSpeaks@gmail.com. If you have any cases that you would like for me to go over and see if I would want to research them, if you have any ideas or anything like that, hit me up, DannieBSpeaks@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out my other podcast, Danny B Speaks, the podcast. It will be streaming on the same platforms that this one is streaming on. Be on the lookout for some other projects I have going on, working with some other people, things like that. Once again, I would like to thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.